who I'm sure is infinitely more qualified to do this chairing than I am. I'm an agribusiness manager with Harvest Road. I work across the supply chain with Ben Dwyer, who presented in the plenary just before. I'll do my best to keep it rolling. We've got a fair bit to get through, so with that, we'll kick off with welcoming Kath Ryan from DPIRD in Kununurra to the stage. And she'll be speaking about state and transition models for tussock grasslands and woodlands in the Kimberley. And she's co-presenting with Chris Hetherington.
Hi everyone. Before we get started, I'd just like to tell you a little bit about Kath and I. We work for the Rangelands Science team and we're based in Kununurra. That's within DPIRD, and we're part of a team that looks after the assessment and management of WA's agricultural resources. As part of our remit, we have an advisory and compliance roles under legislative acts relevant to the condition of land. Carrying capacities and discounts are fundamental to the advice that we provide. Therefore, it is fundamental to our task to have coherent, cohesive and robust information available to base our advice on. As part of developing a suite of tools and information, we have recently been involved in a collaboration with the CSIRO to develop state and transition models for Kimberley tussock grasslands. I'd like you to take a moment to read these statements. And as you're reading those, I'd like you to reflect on a period in time when you think that they were made. Those words were actually penned by Kimberley Durack about 80 years ago in his report to the West Australian Department of Ag. And that report was it was about on the viability of pastoralism in the Kimberley region. It was crafted just 60 years after the industry was established. Certainly a man before his time, Kimberley. Kimberley had significant insight. Firstly, he recognised that ongoing overgrazing would eventually deplete the native pastures, preventing their natural regeneration and causing substantial land degradation along the way, along with productivity problems. Another point he observed was that the decline in land's condition wasn't abrupt. Instead, it represented a gradual continuation of various levels of degraded pastures, which he referred to as the expressions. And you can see, quite a nice bit of work from Kimberley, all handwritten. What he noticed was, or what he observed was that it wasn't a one-way street. These states could be reversed with good land management practice and over varying periods of time. Further, in 1994, there were 13 papers released on state and transition models in the rangelands. 2 of these were important to our task. One by Stockwell et al. On golden beergrass and limestone grass, and another by MacArthur et al. On Mitchell and bluegrass. Each concurred with Durack's observations on the downward spiral to less productive states. However, an essential part of the puzzle was still absent. We needed to determine the approximate point at which these shifts to various expressions occurred. Additionally, was there a measurable standard to define when pasture condition crosses the threshold into being suboptimal or unacceptable? Being able to accurately identify the threshold at which pastures are starting to transition to less productive states and how ecosystems are likely to respond to man-made or natural disturbances is a critical factor in implementing good land management practice. The goal was to be able to provide a roadmap that signposted those drivers of change and tipping points and lead to greener pastures. Over 12 months ago, we set out to develop state and transition models specific to the Kimberley grasslands. And I'd like to invite Kath to the podium, to the lectern here, to fill you in on the findings that we found from that discussion. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. This example shows a state and transition model of a chenopod-dominated pasture in the southern rangelands of Western Australia. Several other state and transition models were published in the 90s through the Tropical Grasslands Journal Forajes Tropicales, and CSIRO has also published others more recently. In developing the thresholds and limits case study for the West Kimberley, we investigated the existing models to see if we could use these as a proxy for Kimberley pastures. One of the models prepared by Stockwell et al. Came pretty close, but in the end, with the exception of this CSIRO hummock grasslands model, we were not confident that relevant published state and transition models existed for key pastures that we must develop standards for. We did have a couple of large data sets and reasonable expertise in the network of current and former colleagues and land managers. So we got in touch with CSIRO and asked if they could help us develop state and transition models for key tussock grassland pastures, initially in the West Kimberley. This paved the way for a collaboration between the CSIRO and the Western Australian Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development. We gathered 16 of the nation's most available ecologists and rangeland management experts for an intensive session to brainstorm and generate insights. This was a substantial endeavour within a limited time frame during the pandemic. The primary focus of the workshop was the tussock grasslands of the Kimberley region, excluding spinifex pastures. This conceptual model of high-level drivers for tussock grasslands was presented at the workshop as part of the overarching Oz Eco Models framework. Other foundational presentations included state and transition model development and a description of reference state models developed from two archetypes. The three objectives of the workshop held in Perth were to identify common ecosystem states associated with red soil and black soil pastures, determine drivers of transitions between ecosystem states, and quantify characteristics and variability associated with each state. Before the workshop, experts were given a description of the pasture types of the Kimberley and a link to a video explaining the WARMS protocols. Experts provided feedback on the reference state models before describing common drivers of change in the Kimberley and developing a list of modified ecosystem states grouped under each reference model. Page. Okay, the final exercise for the workshop involved describing likely transitions between ecosystem states, including drivers, timeframes, preconditions and probabilities. 19 states and 58 transitions were described for the two state and transition models at the workshop. Oops, I've gone too far. Tussock grass pastures in the Kimberley can be roughly divided into black soils and red soils. These rough divisions are more practical than scientific and are not actual soil colours. We learned that the more scientific term for black soil pastures in the Kimberley was rainfall pulse-driven arid and semi-arid tussock grasslands, and for red soil pastures, wet, dry, tropical eucalypt woodlands. These are known as archetypes under the Oz Eco Models framework. This diagram shows the fundamental state and transition model for Kimberley black soil pastures developed at the workshop. So, is this vastly different to MacArthur et al.'s diagram published in Forajes Tropicales in 1994? So there's a few more lines of boxes. Note that boxes 4 and 5 of MacArthur et al. Would have been listed as environmental conditions rather than states in CSIRO's system. Indian cooch is added as a potential state. Relationships between states are a bit more fluid in our model, but essentially there's not a huge difference from the wisdom of MacArthur et al. For those interested in further detail about black soil states and transitions, please take the time to look through the full report, which is available online. Not every lease in the Kimberley has black soil pastures, however, most have at least some red soil pastures that aren't dominated by spinifex. So in the interest of brevity and broad applicability, we'll move on to those. This diagram shows the fundamental state and transition model for Kimberley red soil pastures. We can compare this, oh, I've gone too far, there you go. We can compare this with Stockwell et al.'s diagram from Forajes Tropicales. Our reference state differed from those used by Stockwell et al., and many more transitions were identified, including a recognition that if the potentially productive red soil country is flogged, it is possible to cause a transition to a spinifex-dominated state, from which point a recovery is unlikely and at best uncertain. For each identified state, we workshopped the dominant expression within that state, what conditions would keep the pasture in that expression, and what would cause a shift to another expression or to a whole other ecosystem type. We don't have time to go through these in detail, so please do get in touch if you would like to explore any or all of these at a later date. We also workshopped the environmental factors and management actions that drive transitions between identified states and expressions for desirable and undesirable transitions. Rough timeframes were also discussed. So we have a few things we'd like to do next. I'll talk about a couple of them. Mapping the spatial location of ecosystem states is really a long way from perfect and will require further refinement if we are to use fractional cover, vegetation indices, on-ground measurements, or a combination of these and other data sets. Many of the management actions identified by workshop participants to reverse undesirable transitions and improve pasture condition lack empirical data demonstrating their effectiveness. An important validation of the state and transition models described would be testing the management actions in the region using experimental on-ground interventions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kath and Chris. Great to see a continued open-minded and scientific approach to understanding the changing rangelands. Do we have any questions, please? One down here.
Thanks very much. Great talk. Tony O'Grady from CSIRO. Just wondering, how do you think you'll use the state and transition models?
Do you want to go?
They're already being used at, with our development of our framework and standards to help with to setting those thresholds and limits and knowing those tipping points. So when we're putting together the extension material, it's been a great use in that respect.
Kath, you said that some of the transitions, particularly on the red soils, were irreversible. certainly within a management timeframe. Given that, what impact do you think that may have on conditions placed on leases in terms of regenerating degraded rangeland?
I said that they may be irreversible, but if it turns out that transitions that have occurred due to heavy grazing are irreversible, then the carrying capacity of those leases may need to be revised.
Thanks. We're going to have to keep cracking on, so thanks very much, Kath and Chris. Please put your hands together for them.
Sorry, Declan, just for you. So I'd just like to thank all who collaborated on it, especially the CSIRO, and Dr. Anna Richards in Darwin and Brett Abbott in Townsville. Same with our group too. So, and I see a few faces in the audience that were involved in that. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Next to the stage, can we please welcome Peter Golos from the Western Australian Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions in Kings Park. He's going to talk to us about native pasture restoration in the Kimberley region. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Dick. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. The pastoral industry in the Kimberley region has a long history, and over that time, land management practices has resulted in degradation of the native pastures. Some of the extreme examples is where you got complete bare soil and soil erosion, but sometimes the actual changes have been more subtle, where there's been actual change in the composition of from more desirable native pasture species and transition to less desirable native pasture grasses. And that's what our research project is looking at restoring these more desirable native pasture grasses. This project is a collaboration between Kings Park Science, which is part of DBCA, DPIRD and also Australian Capital Equity, who have provided funding and also the resources to undertake the research at two of their pastoral stations in the West Kimberley, Napier Downs and Mount House. Today's presentation, I'll be outlining three areas of our research. One is the seed collection and assessing the quality and seed germination biology of the actual grasses that we've collected, and also a trial area that we've set up, a seed production area here in Perth. And lastly, where we set up some grazing exclosures for creating reference sites. Also, we conducted some vegetation surveys and also undertook a small-scale seeding trial. So, I guess when undertaking this research project, seed is the most important component that we need to concentrate on. So we undertook a seed collection of the most desirable pasture grasses, and also, I guess, with collecting seed in the Kimberley, what we found on the ground from talking to pastoralists is that the peak seeding period is probably in March, and it basically sort of starts petering out in May. Unfortunately, the wet season usually makes the roads impassable until probably late in the wet season or after the wet season's finished, which is May. So you sort of got a very, very narrow window of opportunity to actually collect seed. And as you can see that picture there, there's one reason why you can't actually get access. Yeah, so we actually collected grass from 16 species over the 3 years that we've tried to collect seed. Most of it's been collected, as I mentioned, early to late May, and there was some opportunity to actually get on site and collect some species in December, which is after the start of the wet season, and also late March when we managed to get out there. Chrysopogon phalanx, we call it in WA ribbon grass. I think some people from overseas might call that bearded or golden bearded grass. That seems to require fire to stimulate flowering and germination, so we only found that by accident, because every time we went up to collect ribbon grass seed, we found there was no flowers, and we couldn't understand it until we came one year we came across a burnt area and it was just flowering profusely and managed to collect seed. So once we collected the seed, we took it back to Kings Park and basically assessed the seed fill and did some germination tests. So for the seed quality testing, we actually examined the seeds or florets under X-rays. And as you can see from the species that we collected, seed fill actually varied quite a lot between species and also within species where we had different collections. And it varied from the panicum, the native millet, from up to 94%, and then the worst was actually the ribbon grass, which was only 0 to 3% of the two collections that we made for it. After after storing the seeds at 15 degrees Celsius, 15% relative humidity for 6 months, we undertook germination testing, and we did that by using the seeds and or florets plated on water agar, and with or without gibberellic acid. Gibberellic acid is a chemical that can actually break physiological dormancy of a lot of these grass seeds, and we incubated the temperatures from 25 to 40 degrees at 5-degree increments. So without treatment, where we're just basically using the floret or the actual seed, we found that in general there actually was pretty high germination for most of the grasses. There was only a couple that basically was less than 50%. That's the sorghum and the panicum. The native millets were actually very low. And when we actually treated it with by removing the seed from the floret, and in addition maybe adding gibberellic acid, we found that actually we had improvement in the actual germination and also in the speed of germination. So only within a day or two, basically you had 50% of the seedlings emerging, germinating from the actual incubation. And next area of research, we looked at setting up a seed production area. And seed supply for the pasture restoration can be difficult to acquire due to, in the Kimberley, there's a lack of suppliers actually working in the Kimberley region. And also, as mentioned previously, there's actually difficulty in accessing the ground during the wet season. And also coinciding with late wet season and after the wet season, basically you've got fires, and also you've got to compete with cattle to actually get the seed. And also you find that a lot of these pastures actually have mixed species, so you basically got to hunt around and pick sort of to collect the different seed species that you require. And also some of the ground, especially the cracking clay soils, can actually have like gilgai country, or called crab hole. You basically can disappear, one of your legs, and it's not good when you haven't got an ACL in one of your legs. So having a seed production area is good for my knee, but also it can increase the availability and decrease the cost of actually native seed supply. And also locating the seed production area next to all-weather roads actually to your advantage as well. And planting of a single species on flat terrain will allow efficient collection of seed, especially if using mechanical harvesters. And also if you use irrigation and fertilisers, you can probably extend the grass flowering period and also increase seed production and also the seed quality. So we set up a seed production area in Shenton Park, Perth, UWA research facility. And when we actually harvested the seed, we found that the actual seed fill for the seed collected at Shenton Park was basically comparable, if not better, than the actual seed fill in the wild collected seed from the Kimberley, which is basically supports the idea when you've actually got, like at that site we had summer watering, plus we actually gave NPK fertiliser, and yeah, as you can see from that picture, they actually grew really well. And in fact, that's an earlier picture, they actually grew even much better. You can see in the adjoining picture there, that's black spear grass actually flowering there, and next to it in the background is actually the bluegrass. So the last area I want to talk about is the setting up of grazing exclosures. Grazing exclosures can be a useful research tool and also provide a reference site. They allow assessment of land management practices on native pastures, and also you can assess the natural regeneration capacity of these pastures, and also you can test different methods of intervention to transition from pastures with low desirability native grasses to higher ones, and which will increase the actual productivity of those pastures. But also important is that these exclosures can provide a reliable source of seed collecting. You don't have any cattle in there. So in this particular location, we set up 3 exclusions on Napier Downs, and when you look at the literature, what you expect to find on the fossil land system on Napier Downs in black cracking clays, you actually expect to find, looking at that table on the right-hand side, I've actually got the 3 major pasture types, the Mitchell grass, bluegrass and ribbon grass pastures, and they're the percentages that basically is in the literature as far as what you'd expect. So you expect 80% of the pasture type to be on that land system's Mitchell grass, but when you look at what's actually been conducted in our actual veg surveys, the frequency occurrence of those grasses in those exclosures, you find that there's actually no Mitchell grass. And it's just during this actual conference where I noticed Kath's poster on the pasture types of the Kimberley, and that seems to be an updated version of what's actually found in the Kimberley, and that actually concurs. There's actually no Mitchell grass, according to her mapping, actually found on Napier Downs. In that area we've set up exclosures. So anyway, but what we can find at Roebuck, there actually is a dominance of Ariadne glauca. So I guess there's a state and transition model, Kath, that you can explain why that's actually happened. Yeah, so anyway, we set up a grazing exclosure, and basically to ensure that when we do throw the seeds out on the ground, there actually might be a chance of germination. We actually burnt the area, but because, as you can see in that first picture on the left, you can see after 1 month, the actual wandery grass actually grew back quite profusely, so we had to use a brush cutter. And the other thing is if you actually just brush cut it and the actual tussocks grow back, they still might outcompete, so we actually cultivated for an avid treatment to remove those tussocks. So the results are, on that small-scale seeding trial, we actually used 3 species, the Dicantium sericine, which is bluegrass, black speargrass, and the panic. And what we found is that there was no germination. Well, looking first in the brush cut plots, basically there was no germination. The actual wandery grass basically covered 100%, so there was no germination, and it's basically dominated by the wandery grass. And in the actual cultivated plots, that's where we had some success, where we had some Dicantium and the panicum germinate, but no black speargrass. But also we actually had some germination from the actual topsoil seed bank, and we had the ribbon grass actually had some germination in one of the plots. I think we've probably run out of time. Yeah, okay, well, thanks.
Thanks very much for that, Peter. That's really great work that you're doing, and we'd love to see more opportunities to sow palatable perennial grasses to regenerate and improve country. Do we have time for a question? One? Yeah.
Great presentation, thank you. Love a good disclosure. David Phelps from JCU. I'm just wondering, with so many of those species being dependent on fire and or smoke for germination, how effective or what changes need to be made to a soil seed bank methodology to actually ensure that those species are also coming through?
Yeah, that's interesting. A lot of the treatments that we give in the laboratory basically tries to emulate what actually naturally happens in the topsoil seed bank. So things like fire, and plus when seeds actually enter the topsoil seed bank, they undergo some sort of period of transition where they basically break in dormancy happens, and so there actually can be a lot of germination without human interference, maybe cultivation, just to remove the competition, like with the wandery grass that I demonstrated, where basically if you didn't cultivate the actual, to remove the actual tussocks, basically it was basically overwhelmed by the wandery grass. But when we actually remove existing vegetation that actually stimulated germination. But yeah, so I guess it's probably not a need to, but Kings Park has done research on actually using a chemical carrageenanide, and it's been in the process of development for quite a while where they can use it maybe over broadacre agriculture to stimulate weed germination. But as far as I can tell, nothing's actually come commercially on the market where you can actually use it in broadacre or in rangelands to stimulate germination of the topsoil seed bank.
Can we please put our hands together for Peter? Thanks very much. That's great. Next up, I'd like to welcome to the stage, please, Kurt Elizevich, who's a local pastoralist from Country Downs Station here in the West Kimberley. Kurt's going to talk about regenerating rangelands in the northwest with fire, grazing, rest and collaboration. Thanks, Kurt.
Right, this should be interesting. Fun fact, people that know me will confirm this. When I was a kid, I was told I could probably talk underwater, and when I was a pearl diver, I actually learnt to, so there you go. Right, where's that clicky thing, Dak?
Down here, look.
Righto. Pointing at that. Yeah. Righto. Now, firstly, I want to thank Jardine McDonald, who forced me to do this and put most of it together. So the good bits are his, and if there's any bugger ups, well, that's my fault. Okay, Country Downs, situated in the middle of the Dampier Peninsula there. It's an image of the homestead. It's a kind of unique piece of country. 1,000 mil rainfall, which is considerably higher than the surrounding area. That really presents its own set of challenges. When we took the lease on in 2003, we were told by the pastoral board it was unviable. I took that as a bit of a challenge, how 180,000 hectares of 1,000 mil rainfall country can be unviable. And, oh look, I'm still there after 20 years, so that's saying something. I wanted to share this image. Popped up on Facebook one day, and my first glance, I thought it was an old stone tank in the West Pilbara or something like that. Turns out it's a remnant Crusader fort, I think in North Africa, and I guess what really struck me about that image is a parable for all of our pastoral endeavours going to shit, basically. You look at that and think, well, why would you build that out there? And then hang on, how would you build that out there? And then how would you even feed the people to build it? So I guess, you know, it was a very strong image for me as far as a parable for what we can do wrong and how far the system can break. And again, looking around the landscape, as part of a tour, you'll see a snapshot out the window, and I think there's a lot of parallels for it that just because you're seeing something out the window doesn't mean it's how it should be or how it has been. It's just a snapshot in time. Right. How to use the pointer bit on this? Is that, or do we not? I'll just describe the image. So on the upper left there, you'll see that there's a lot of acacia regrowth there, and it reaches a point where it's shading out and suppressing the perennial grasses. On the right-hand side, you can see that's probably, in a successional sense, that's probably 18 months down the track from the left-hand picture, and it dominates and it locks up the country, and it's very fire tolerant and fire propagative, if that's even a word. So we're in this short cycle down here on the succession scale, and you're really not getting anywhere, and it's hot fires, frequent fires, and that was the cycle that property was stuck in when I took it on. That just gives you an idea of the severity of fire. So that was probably taken in about August 2 years ago. That was a backburn fighting a bushfire. once you start to get fire going like that, there's really not much will pull it up. We've had fire at that time of year jumping 5 kilometres ahead of itself. So it's not a situation you want to be in, and as a result of that, we end up with a lot of this early burning going on to try and suppress that, but that in turn presents its own set of problems. No?
Pointed over this way.
Whereabouts?
Over this way seems to work.
Okay. Well, here's some examples of some of the fire effect we've had. Actually wasn't too bad a year, that one. I think the next one's significantly worse. Yeah, that was a ripper. So I think we got 98% burnt out over about 6 weeks. Yeah, that was heaps of fun. The one on the right there actually shows we had a fair crack that year. We actually did 70 kilometres of successful backburning diagonally across the property and down across the neighbours there, and managed to save ourselves a bit. But yeah, it's a massive challenge. Here's more pictures of lots of fire. And I guess the disclaimer I'd like to make on this is a lot of this, it just shows fire frequency, and I think more important than frequency, we need to be focusing on timing. Just because it's burnt doesn't mean that's a bad thing. This is a fire-adapted landscape. But what we're getting at here is, look how much fire is in that landscape. It is ridiculous. And this was a cycle we had to try and break, and by whatever means necessary. So the formation of the Dampier Fire Working Group was a big assist to us in that we're attacking the problem on a landscape scale, because this is a homogenous landscape. There's no natural barriers in it. You know, I'd love a scalded flat or a river or something to be able to work off, but we don't have it. It's all just one big land system with no breaks in it. So what do we got here? This is, again, in my view, relatively poor land condition on the left, and on the right is significantly better. But if we look here, that was burnt all in the same year, and that's a graphic example of the difference in timing of fire. Early dry season favours the tap-rooted plants, and they just keep growing all through the dry, whereas your perennial grasses are shut down. So early season burning on the right, it's a far more productive and diverse system as far as we're concerned. Now that, I'm not just talking about fire on its own, we're talking about fire, rest, grazing. It's all part of the system, but, you know, we're talking about fire here right now. The upper image on the left, that, believe it or not, is 7 days after a fire. That's perennial ribbon grass dominated pasture. That's the kind of result we want. We're minimising bare ground. One of my big criticisms about all this early season burning, yes, it prevents the bushfires, but we're looking at bare ground for 7 or 8 months, and that's shocking for the environment, and it's not very productive from a pastoral point of view either. So that's upper left, that's 7 days, and that's probably at about 2 weeks, the lower one. It is unbelievable how quick this country recovers with rain. On the right, yeah, that's the following dry season. So you can see that we've suppressed a lot of this woody regrowth. In the background, you can see the tree canopy's healthy because it's a relatively cool, fast fire. So we're not buggering up the tree canopy, and we're really stimulating diversity in the landscape. I think I'm doing well here. How are we going for time? All right. Well, this is sort of acknowledgement to the rest of it and the fact that it's not just the fire. There's a few people sitting in the audience that have been crucial to my learning journey, and they'll be recognising a few of these images here. On the left-hand side, we're looking. That's training weaners on diversifying their diet, so they're improving their intake of secondary plants, basically it's like giving them a recipe book. You know, they're not just eating the sweetest pastures, and if we can increase that percentage of secondary pastures that are being converted by those animals, well, that's helping ecological succession as well, because we're putting grazing pressure on some of the less desirable plants. An aid to that, in the centre there you'll see the lick tub, and we cook our own charcoal and we feed that with phosphorus as an aid to digestion to help those animals digest and bypass some of those toxic secondary compounds. There's some pictures of some adapted cattle there. Dung beetles, you know, they're a huge aspect of things, and over the years I have learnt to stay away from chemicals, because regardless of what it says on the drum, it usually kills your dung beetles, and then you end up caught in this other horrible cycle of buffalo fly and all these other things. Our other little mates there, I think that's something out of a microscope that Jardine found in our soil and got very excited about. Yeah. Oh, look at that. I'm just about doing well here. The little land snails, obviously things like that don't really get on well when you've got a 70-kilometre fire front coming through the country. So that's a little nod to the rest of the ecosystem and how important we see it as part of contributing to our overall biodiversity, whether it's the little birds that come in and scratch around and move seeds around, or the insects, everything. It's all part of an active system, and I guess it's very it's important to me, because I saw that country when it was a green desert. There was nothing going on out there, and to be able to see different birds and animals coming back into that landscape is just so empowering. And you know, I think it was probably 5 years there, believe it or not. I'd been there for 5 years before I saw my first pigeon. That's how buggered that landscape was. And then now we're seeing all these other things. I mean, this year, for example, there's thousands of those Wero parrots. Never seen them before. And, you know, the country's always got something to teach you year after year, and we don't know where the upper edge of landscape improvement really is. It's every time I think I get it going good, it gives me another surprise, and there's an opportunity to get it better. So I think that's the message for pastoralists out there. Just keep doing whatever you can, and look at your results and build on those results. And I don't know where the upper limit of productivity is in the rangelands. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kurt. That was great. I'm sure there's a question.
No, we're good, really.
G'day, Katie Hay, DAF in Queensland. You've done a great job, obviously, and I hope this question doesn't ruffle any feathers of anybody else in the audience, but I was just wondering, it's a lease with WA, is that right?
Pastoral lease, yeah.
Yeah. I was just wondering, does the WA offer any incentive or anything like that for improving the country so much?
No. There is a stick effect, though, that if you bugger the country up, they tell you can't run as many cattle, which is fair enough.
Hi, Kurt. Robin Cowley with NT Primary Industries, and we've got that 30-year fire experiment at Kidman. So I really enjoyed your talk about fire, and this is an experiment that we have, which means we just apply the same treatments all the time, and they've always been June, early dry, and October, late dry. So we actually don't really know the impacts of the early wet season burning that you've been applying, and so my question to you is, it seemed like, I just wanted to confirm, that was actually a pretty good way to clean up those shrubs while looking after the taller woody plants. Is that right?
Yeah, well, as an outcome of seeing some of your plots up there years ago on a field trip, it was an interesting experience for me, because I mean, obviously it's a different land system and different pasture types and all of that, but I guess it's a kind of a prescriptive approach that has been taken in that long-term trial, and I guess as a discussion I had with Alan Sabry years ago was that there is no recipe, it's philosophy, it's art, it's not science. We've just got to see what our results come out and build on positive indicators. So that's been my approach. I've tried many things, many different methods. Some work and some don't. And it's just something that it's ridiculous in retrospect when you think about it, that you think you try all these different things and hang on, why don't I have a good hard think about what happened in nature? What created these grasslands that the first explorers saw when they came through? And how do we mimic that? And that's essentially what we're trying to do, is to try and, we get glimpses from the past, and I've had people say, the early explorers, they were bullshitting because they just wanted everyone to go out there and be pastoralists. Well, that's not true. And we heard from Alejandro about it, grass the height of the saddle. And, we need to take that stuff, take it as it was intended. It's real information. Right, I'm out.
Good. Yeah, you're good. Thanks very much, Kurt. Next to the stage, we've got Paul Jones from Queensland DAF. He's going to talk on management of pasture dieback, rundown and Indian cooch invasion in buffel pastures of central Queensland. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, thanks Declan. This presentation is part of the Queensland Pasture Resilience Program. It's funded by MLA, Australian Government and the Queensland Government. And I'm part of a team doing this who couldn't be here. Stewie Buck, Kylie Hopkins, Kendrick Cox and Palani Shadow who actually established these trials, and I get to report on them. But buffel grass pastures in central Queensland are a very important and productive area for Queensland, if not Northern Australia. Most of them were cleared 40 to 60 years ago, but there's an interaction of problems that are significantly reducing production. And the first one is the pasture rundown, the tie-up of available nitrogen in the organic matter, and that's reducing productivity. And in cohorts with that is the Indian cooch and pasture dieback. The Indian cooch is a very low producing stoloniferous grass. It produces a heap of seed at any time of the year, and invading, and why isn't that working? Which is oh my own, all right. As you can see from those photos on the right, the top one, the lower grass is Indian cooch, and the taller grass is buffel grass, and that's quite typical of the problem. The lower photograph, that grey and black looking buffel grass is suffering from pasture dieback, and that's a real issue right across the buffel grass. So there's potential to restore productivity. And legumes are a big part of the problem as well. There's two benefits of the legumes. One is that they fix nitrogen, of course, and can address that nitrogen tie-up issue. But also they are resilient to pasture dieback. They don't seem to be affected by pasture dieback at all. And we've got some really good shrubby stylos and Brigades desmanthus that are doing really well. And some of the modelling is showing that legume incorporation and pasture improvement is a good return on investment. So we're aiming to, it's a sort of multi-purpose trials, 4 trials I'm going to talk about, examining the role of sown pastures, agronomy, fertiliser, break crops and pesticides for restoring productivity. These trials were established in nearly 3 years ago. All of them were on old cleared buffel grass sites. All were heavily affected by Indian cooch, a big composition of Indian cooch and dieback. Each trial is replicated and completely randomised design. This is the Middlemount site. You can see the incursion of Indian cooch in that site. We're looking at the broadly sown pastures, agronomy, fertiliser. This is on a duplex soil. It's deficient in nitrogen and phosphorus, and a lot of these soils were cropped previously, during the beef slump in the 70s, and that took a bit of the nutrition out of the soils as well. And we're trying a range of sown pastures there, grasses and legumes, and also we've got our control treatments comparing with a do nothing strategy. And one of the treatments here is just broadcasting fertiliser on Gain and Buffalo and Indian Cooch, and that one's gone really well. This is the banana site. As you can see, the trials plots are between the rows of Leukina, and you can see from that photo how the buffalo grass has really thinned out, and the Indian Cooch is coming in there. We've got a range of good subtropical grasses and legumes that are being trialled on that site, as well as some cultivation treatments, and part of these trials are as well to look at good agronomy in terms of fallowing to store soil moisture and make a good soil seed contact. This is the Mara site. That picture is after it was cultivated, and the whole site was cultivated, so it's a side-by-side comparison of 10 different grasses and 5 different legume sub-treatments. That one again is on a duplex soil. And then the site at Villaweela, this one's on a deep, fertile, cracking clay black soil, and looking at sowing buffalo grass mixes, grass legumes, and a single cultivation. I'll just use the common names for the grasses and legumes, and all these, the scientific names and all will be in the publication coming out. Just on some of the results, this is the Middlemount site, and these are the results from May this year. The broadcast fertiliser, you can see, which is the pointer on this one?
There's that middle one.
No, sorry. 15,000 kilos of dry matter that's grown since that was fertilised 2 years ago. It's 2 annual treatments of 100 kilograms per hectare of nitrogen, as well as phosphorus. The next group are very similar to the control. So the control is the untouched, and you can see the fungicide and the insecticide treatments are not significantly different to the control, but they've all still got around half their composition is of Indian Cooch. So that's the first good finding, positive result. That broadcast fertiliser has reduced the composition of Indian Cooch to a minuscule level. And the Gain to Buffalo grass really did well on that fertiliser and got it before the Indian Cooch did. Gain to Buffalo grass is very susceptible to pasture dieback, and so we don't think we've had pasture dieback impacting the growth at this site. We have observed yellowing and reddening of the leaves, but the growth doesn't seem to be impacted at all. The next group of 3 treatments down the end there, as you can see, there's a good composition of Katinga and shrubby stylos, again as a result of good fallowing and storing for soil moisture, getting a good establishment of improved grasses there, and again minimising the composition of Indian Cooch. So some good preliminary results there. This is the banana site. It had a bit drier conditions than the other sites, and not doing quite as well. This is again the May 2023 data. My colleagues have went to this site a month ago, and the creeping bluegrass is grey and dead. So the pasture dieback has hit the creeping bluegrass, and it looks like it's dead. We've made a number of observations of mealybugs. Mealybugs seem to have a pretty important role in pasture dieback. And because of the dry conditions, we've still got a fair bit of Indian Cooch in some of these treatments. So the pasture dieback has been, we don't have a fully understanding of its ecology or causal agents, and it's behaving as it normally does quite irregularly in this trial. So this is the Mara site. All the grasses did fairly well here, and as you can see, most of them were very competitive, and again suppressed the composition of Indian Cooch, which is a good outcome. The legume establishment didn't go as well as we thought, but they are there. That may change within time. The Sabi glass is the lowest yielding one there, and that did get hit by pasture dieback. Seemed to have suppressed his growth. A lot of those other grasses are all all prone to pasture dieback as well, but they didn't get hit by it. So again, it's been quite irregular. The Billawheeler site, again, with the good agronomy, again, got a good establishment of the improved grasses and suppression of Indian cooch. The control has still got quite a lot of Indian cooch there. It had dry conditions as well, but it's done pretty well. So just in conclusion, the many grasses and treatments were successful, have restored the productivity of these rundown pastures and addressed and really minimised the amount of Indian cooch. The fallowing, all those treatments that were ploughed or had a herbicide fallow were between 3 and 5 months, except for the Billawheeler site. It had a longer one because of the dry conditions, and that just shows the benefit of fallowing and storing soil moisture in terms of establishing those grasses and legumes. The legumes, yeah, have been a bit disappointing, except for the Middlemount site, but that could change in time. Some of the economic modelling has shown the benefits of legumes. There hasn't been a lot of legumes established in buffel-grass pastures, but there's a big potential to improve productivity there, and having those dual benefits of fixing nitrogen, and the legumes are not susceptible to dieback. As I said, the pasture dieback has been irregular, but basically didn't have a big effect on these trials. So because we don't understand fully its ecology, we can't really say that any of those treatments are suppressing dieback. But there's still a lot of diagnostic work going on around the insects and the pathogens with pasture dieback. So just in conclusion, to restore productivity of these pastures, there's going to be intervention needed. It's looking good in terms of the modelling for the economic benefits. A do-nothing strategy can be sustainable, of course, and we'll need to learn more about the pasture dieback ecology as this project goes on. It's going on for the next 4 years. Thank you.
Just got a question here.
Thank you. Paul, Jamie Gordon. You've done an intervention and a control. Did you ever consider a changed management regime on some of that? Because if you continued the same management that created the problem on your control, if you'd changed the management, you may have got a different response without quite so much intervention, do you think, or something to consider?
Yeah. Hi, Jamie. No, we didn't within these trials. But other work, we will be looking at grazing management and Indian cooch at the Wombiana grazing trial. So yeah, it's a matter of resources as well and prioritising things. And yeah, we have to have a control treatment to see whether there are significant differences. So good comment. Thanks, Jamie.
Paul, Dione Walsh. As someone who works extensively in areas that doesn't have pasture dieback, I'm wondering, how is it spread by people and animals moving around the landscape? And is there a risk that people visiting these dieback sites are actually spreading it around?
Yeah, quite possibly. The mealybug looks like the main culprit. There's a lot of evidence around it, and every study that's been done by every organisation on pasture dieback, there's been mealybugs present. They're still working out the other interactions with mealybug as well. They can be a vector for pathogens as well. They're wind-borne, but yeah, it's an unknown, Dione. I mean, this pasture dieback, sometimes it'll stop at a fence line, so it's until we fully understand the ecology, I can't really answer that question, honestly.
Paul, did you use the bricks meter or anything else to look at the health of the existing pasture in the buffel? And I mean, one of the things, there's more solutions out there than what's been going for a long time in central Queensland and in that country. And I agree with what Jamie's saying. We need some other parts to make a holistic thing to look at the whole approach. But one of the beliefs I have anyway is a healthier grass that contains more sucrose, more sugars, isn't attractive to mealybugs. It's no different than cattle. If they're healthy in that, they're not attacked by all the predators and parasites, and a healthy plant. So in that process, as some of this is going, is there any measures of the health of the plant through a bricks meter?
No, we haven't done that yet, Artie. This project's going for another 5 years, so with those nitrogen fertilisers, but certainly we like to look at the crude protein there. So we've only measured yield and composition so far, and that's why we had control treatments as well. So taken on board, we'll think about looking at the sugar content as well as the protein content of those things.
Paul, Don Burnside, are they the tussocks that are dying? Are they the original plants that were planted, say, 40 years ago, whenever the land was cleared and pastured?
Quite possibly, Don. I don't think there's ever been any demographic studies done on buffel grass, but it wouldn't surprise me if it lives for longer than 30 years. But it does kill a range of sizes of buffel grass. And over the last 10 or 12 years in pasture dieback areas, my own observations are there's very few seedlings coming through there, whether that's just the prolonged dry conditions we've had or whether the dieback was preventing those seedlings as well. So where it hits, it can take everything out and without any seedlings coming back. So it seems to be it can take all age groups out. In saying that, that first photo I showed you with those grey tussocks, that was in 2017, and you go down and have a look at right in the crowns of those, and there was always one or two live tillers, and that buffel grass is fully recovered. So it's really quite variable and inconsistent in the way it's operating. Why it hasn't come back to any significant extent in these trials, we don't really know. We've had dry years and wet years. So, last one.
Thanks very much, Paul. Great.
Thank you.
That was great. Next up's Andrea Scherner from the South Australian Arid Lands Landscape Board, and she's going to speak to us about digging deep to better manage pastoral country, understanding the soils in arid landscapes. Please welcome Andrea.
G'day everyone. We've seen a few photos like this over the last couple of days, and who doesn't love a good fence line effect photo? The extraordinary thing about this picture is that both sides of the fence are actively grazed. It is the management of the grazing that is different. And what also is interesting, I'd just like to note is, so I'm from South Australia, the interesting context of all the presentations just in the last couple, we would love a bit of dieback in South Australia. Buffel grass is a declared weed, so how amazing our management implications across the rangelands of Australia and how complex that is. I decided to start this presentation with this photo not to identify the challenges of managing rangelands country, but the great number of opportunities we have ahead of us to engage our pastoral industry. Now, in South Australia, now more than ever, is a significant time of change across our pastoral region. The turnover of pastoral properties has been unprecedented. Tightly held pastoral leases held in families for a very long time have been turning over recently. Property prices have been crazy. That's another presentation altogether. But there's also a noticeable successional shift with a lot of younger managers now taking the reins and stepping into positions of management on pastoral leases in our region. Aligned with this, the 2021 census data shows that in the outback areas region of South Australia, only 36% of our population has finished high school. I did some quick Googling this morning, and far north Kimberley's 15%. So we have a number of young pastoral managers coming in to our industry who are highly educated in mining and engineering and have great business management skills, but possibly haven't done biology at high school, and they certainly haven't studied ag science. So there's huge potential for us to be educating our new pastoral industry in terms of some of the rangeland sciences that we're all here studying today. As custodians of Australia's rangelands, every one of us in this room has a great opportunity to pull the lever to ensure best practice management in our regions. And it all starts with understanding our soils. So today I'm going to share with you some of the stories and experiences that have come out of a Future Drought funded program that we've been running in South Australia, in particular a project called From the Ground Up. Now there's lots of funding and different projects that have gone into that, but I'm just going to share some of the overall experiences we've had. So whether you're an extension officer, a research scientist, or a land manager, I'm going to challenge you with a call to action to dig deep. We all have a role to play in improving knowledge about soils and managing the inland of Australia. Now, I must confess, I'm a plant person and a people person, so I'm not a soil specialist by any means, but I do know how important soils are. Soils are truly fascinating, and I'm not the only one who thinks this. So we've been running, in this photo is an example of a field day we recently held. We've been running field days across the South Australian pastoral region. Now, our region is very sparsely populated, so getting more than 5 to 10 people at a field day is a coup, and you can see in this picture we've crammed a few people into this erosion gully. So the appetite for knowledge and understanding on this very source of primary production is significant. We need to nurture this, and we're seeing that people are turning up. They're thirsty and hungry for knowledge. As we all know, soil science is a very complex beast. There are 3 separate disciplines immediately associated with soil science. There's soil physics, that hurts my head. Soil chemistry, I didn't do well in school at chemistry either. Soil biology, I've got my head a little bit more around that. And then yesterday I learnt, listening to the living skin stuff, about soil biogeochemistry. So there are so many sciences associated with soils, but the messaging can be very simple. All soil science and all soil sciences are best applied when related to land management practice. Soil erodibility. It's largely about physics, but how do I build and design my roads through this soil type? Do I need woe-boys? The ability to grow feed. Understanding land units and land systems all comes down to a good understanding of soil type and vegetation patterns. And here's the hook when working with pastoralists: livestock nutrition, linking livestock nutrition, feed nutrition with soils. So here's my first call to action. If you're working with land managers, get some bloody good maps. Everyone loves a map. It creates a focal point for some amazing discussions. And as you can see in this photo, it doesn't require eye contact. I'm serious about this. A lot of the people that we work with across the rangelands have a range of literacy skills, but a map is a leveller. Most people, everyone can read and understand a map, and you can engage some wonderful conversations from this. If you can't find a soils map for the region you're working in, that's just fine. Download a Google Maps, go to Google Earth Engine, have a look at the Landsat maps, ask questions, discover patterns, and do it together. My second call to action: value local knowledge and observations, and align it with technical expertise and data. Invite as many specialists and ideas to the table to discuss soil parameters and how to manage soils to their optimum. Anyone who's been up the Birdsville track might recognise this iconic character on the right. This is Gordon Litchfield. He's in heaps of R.M. Williams Outback magazines. That moustache is pretty cool. Gordon's been around for a very long time in the Murray district, and in this photo we were taking the opportunity to jump into an eroded gully head at Inaminka, at a small field day with a range of other topics. Also in this picture is Jeff Q, who's a soil scientist who we've been lucky enough to work with. He comes to us from the viticulture sector. So that's what I'm saying, engage all technical areas of expertise to the rangelands. Jeff has a wealth of knowledge working in Saudi Arabia and Iran in his past. So yeah, focusing on irrigated viticulture, but his knowledge of soil science is incredible. And when you link that with local observations about erodibility and how soils perform in different rainfall events and how they grow feed, aligning those two sources of information is very, very powerful in a group setting. Engage the next generation. This is Honey and Bo from Winton Station. They were out with me on this day, and we were actually looking for dung beetles. There are so many opportunities for us to engage in informal citizen science projects across our pastoral zone. Make hats. South Australian Rangelands Soils Academy. You saw it here first. Create prizes and incentives for citizen science. Engage School of the Air kids. Unearth the fascinating. Kids are an untapped resource in our region. They're so enthusiastic and they get involved wherever possible. They love getting dirty. Collect data with land managers. This is a diagram with a lot of information in it, but if you imagine this starting as a clean slate, as a diagram of an area with good vegetative cover and perennial species, and then an area adjacent with bare scalded area. With some simple and cheap tools, if you go out with land managers and collect soil-related data, it suddenly becomes a very powerful message. So we did some simple water infiltration tests with a PVC tube, pouring 200 mils in and timing how long water takes to get into the soil profile. Underneath Acacia victoriae with a couple of perennial species, took 4 minutes, 30 seconds. It's still a long time. But in an adjacent area, the same amount of water takes more than 10 minutes to go into the soil profile. Very simple experiments can have great meaning when it's practiced on country. I think everyone would be familiar with a landscape similar to this. You've got this amazing alluvial floodplain where water used to flow in large sheets across the landscape, and it's since been intersected by an old poorly placed track, which is now turned into a gully, and we'll put the new track over here. So the gully intersects a floodplain, drains water away, droughts, downside. Everyone's seen this, right? Always look at the landscape, but where you can, add some numbers to give land management principles real weight. So photo on the left, photo on the right, no surprises there. We were lucky enough to use our project budget to actually get soil testing done. So when you start adding numbers, suddenly it becomes very meaningful. On the left, organic carbon in the top 10 centimetres, 2.1%, less than half on the right, so 0.9, lower down in the profile, 1.46% as opposed to 0.7. So we've halved our soil carbon and organic soil carbon content by droughting our landscape. Once you put numbers to things, pastoralists love numbers. It really adds weight to good management to start off with. Make soil science fun. Add novel ideas. Use tools and equipment available to you. So hats off to Oliver Knox from UNE, who started the Soil Ya Undies experiment. It's just such a winner. I've actually not met Oliver, but we've stolen his idea and we've taken it with us in the rangelands. Pastoralists love digging up old undies now. In this field day, under, again, Acacia victoriae, a very degraded landscape, but it is slowly recovering. We've got these two pastoralists to pull up a pair of undies that were attached to a wire so we could find them again. And here's the results. On the right, undies under Acacia victoriae. On the left, undies buried in a scalded, fairly typical area of that paddock. That image speaks for itself. We don't need to collect data there. Engage everyone on the property. Women are often left out of field days because of their caring role. Maybe they're cooking for a stock camp or back at home with kids in the schoolroom. We've made a few days specifically for women and children, and we align these with School of the Air events that are held in Port Augusta. Make them baby friendly and family friendly, and people will come And a lab is possible anywhere. I love our tailgate lab. Equipment doesn't need to be expensive. At the local hardware shop, you can get a soil pH kit for less than $10. If you've got a bit more fat in your budget, soil salinity meters, some colour charts, you can do hand texturing for free. So the question is, how deep do we dig? Well, I suggest you jump in a hole, or as my learned colleagues like to call a soil pit. Jump in, have a good look at the soil profile, and you'll soon find out how deep you need to dig. Whether you have the budget or resources to employ a teaspoon, an auger, or an excavator, dig as deep as you can and ask the questions. The more pastoralists understand their soils, the more they want to do to conserve them. Thank you.
Stick around, we've got time for questions. Thanks very much, Andrea. Fantastic approaches that you've described there. Do we have any questions, please? No, looks like you're off the hook. Put your hands together, please. Thank Andrea Scherner. Next to the stage, could we please have Jayden Eastoff. She's from the Northern Territory DITT, and is going to talk about seeing is believing on the Barkly Mitchell Grass Recovery Project. Thanks, Jayden.
Good afternoon, everybody. Oops. All right. Seeing is believing, the Barkly Mitchell Grass Recovery Project. So, funded through the Future Drought Fund and in collaboration with TNRM, the aim of rain-ready rangelands is to deliver regionally relevant land management advice through on-ground demonstrations, with an aim to showcase how to make pastures rain-ready, increase recovery after dry periods, and make the most out of rain events. There is a strong focus on identifying and overcoming barriers in adoption of recommended grazing land management practices. So, Rain Ready is an NT-wide project with 4 main components. The Paddock Challenge you would have already heard from Lakota, but it's currently underway in Central Australia, where properties are trialling the impacts of using long-term safe carrying capacities and comparing them to current management. Changes in pasture composition, land condition, soil health, animal performance data, as well as financial performance are being monitored and compared. In the Victoria River District, a one-on-one support and case study focused on the use of SIBO Labs technology and forage budgeting is underway. We are focusing on identifying the challenges and learnings when it comes to adjusting stocking rates based on land condition and seasonal variability. The Barkly region component aims to trial the commercial scale application of wet season spelling to promote Mitchell grass recovery. This aspect of rain-ready rangelands is what I'll be focusing on today. The forage tool was developed by Queensland DES and DAF to deliver property-scale information on land type and paddock long-term carrying capacity and seasonal growth. Currently, forage is only provided to Queensland properties, and this project aims to evaluate and demonstrate if forage can be delivered in the NT as a way of extending carrying capacity information to NT pastoralists. Mitchell grass. Mitchell grass is a major component within the alluvial cracking clay grasslands of the Barkly region and is a key indicator of land condition. They are palatable, productive, and perennial pasture species that contribute significantly to the diet quality and quantity within the region. After prolonged below average seasons, there has been a noticeable reduction in Mitchell grasses, with some areas experiencing a dieback, where large areas of Mitchell grass have completely disappeared. I do want to make note that the dieback I'm referring to is related to drought. Project objectives. So the overall objectives of our project are to trial the commercial scale application, create a detailed case study, and to bridge the gap between research and adoption. How are we going to do this? So, the producer-led demonstration at Anthony's Lagoon Station involves wet season spelling paddocks, where land condition and Mitchell grass have declined. So a nearby paddock will be set stocked continuously as a comparison, and 3 exclosures will be erected, targeting areas where the impacts are most noticeable. So the project aims to be a visual demonstration where producers can see on ground how spelled country compares to grazed country over the wet. Some info on the exclosures. So the exclosures will be 100 by 100 metres, and in an area in the same paddock we'll have pseudo exclosure. So we'll peg out 100 metre exclosure again, and we'll compare them. Changes in ground cover, species composition and soil health will be measured using a before-after control and impact approach. So data collection. We'll be doing a full botanal as well as individual tussock measurements. We'll also be using multispectral aerial photography. We're doing soil assessments as well as biocrust collection and collecting other data. We've got farm bots out there to collect weather data, animal performance data and GPS collars. We have already deployed 100 GPS collars between the control and the wet season spelled paddocks to give us a better understanding of cattle behaviour in the area. So extension, this is a major focus as a part of this project. So we'll be participating, organising a paddock walk, taking time-lapse videos from the Barkly, social media updates which are already underway, thanks to Stacey and Mary. We'll be doing a case study, providing fact sheets, posters, short videos and webinars. An Edge workshop was hosted earlier on in the year. Presentations at events, and newsletter articles and project pages on future beef. So expected outcomes. We aim to go through the process of developing a grazing demonstration using a combination of scientifically proven grazing strategies and boots on the ground. We have already identified a few challenges as the project has been developing regarding getting the right number of cattle into the paddocks and the difficulty in being prepared prior to the wet season. A big focus is on where the missing pieces of adoption are, identifying the barriers and how we can make it easier for producers to go from trialling these practices to making them standard practice. Thank you. Any questions?
Thanks, Jaden. Gus White here. I'm just interested in the methods of management you're looking for the, say, in a 3 paddock rotation, you're looking for the paddocks that aren't being wet season spelled to make sure they're not getting any damage or suffering because they're taking one paddock out of the rotation, i.e. your wet season spelling. So the paddocks that are being used in order to spell the wet season paddock, how are they going to be managed?
Sorry, I don't quite understand the question. So how we're managing them. So we're using the 3 paddock rotation for the wet season, and the exclosures are where we're collecting the data to compare. So that's kind of our control, is using the areas within the exclosure. We're going to collect the same data outside of the exclosure where the wet season spelling is occurring and then compare those. Does that kind of answer it?
I guess I'm just trying, as a landholder,
Yeah.
I'm trying to get an understanding of how I'm going to manage the paddocks that I'm using so that I can give one paddock a full wet season spell, if that's what you're talking about.
Yeah. So that comes into the case study part of it. So we're working with the land manager themselves, and part of it is they are going to tell us what they want to do with the process as well. So that's, by the end of it, hopefully we have a more detailed outline of the actual management and what is going on, to give us a better understanding of how to manage it in an appropriate way. Anybody else? Cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Jaden. Please join me in thanking Jaden. We're going to head into some rapid fire quick presentations leading up to lunch, so we'll try and keep them rolling through pretty quick. Welcome to the stage Nathan Penny from the Western Australian Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development to tell us how the department assesses rangeland condition. Thanks, Nathan.
Thank you. And just for context, I'm part of the same team which Kath Ryan, Chris Hetherington and Rob Sudmeyer who have already spoken for that context. So I'll speak very briefly to the purpose, the fieldwork and report preparation and use of rangeland condition assessment. It is a requirement of the Soil and Land Conservation Act and also the Land Administration Act under which leases are issued in Western Australia. It's there to provide systematic and consistent assessment and generally reports on the basis of pastoral stations, which of course may comprise of one or more pastoral leases. It's the intention that all pastoral land would be regularly subject to rangeland condition assessment. We prioritise leases in a desktop process where we consider the risk of land degradation is high and on the time elapsed since the previous assessment. Degradation risk is determined by looking at previously reported condition, either via an RCA or original land surveys. We consider the reported stocking rates, the current carrying capacity and rainfall. How do we do that? Well, where stocking rates exceed the current carrying capacity and we have poor seasonal rainfall conditions, then we know the risk of land degradation increases. We also use remotely sensed data to look at vegetation change, and the DPIRD officers themselves can provide local knowledge and expertise. With the field work, we always invite the lessee's representatives to attend the field work, and it's a great chance to exchange information, for them to learn of our process and for us to learn of their practice. The two officers will travel by departmental vehicle using available tracks to assess the pasture condition and erosion at 1 kilometre intervals on a predetermined traverse route. That route is chosen to sample the most productive pastures on the lease, those responsive to grazing impact. Pasture type and condition is assessed using the criteria set out in the relevant pasture condition guide and land survey. The pasture condition describes the current state compared to the optimal of what a site is capable of producing, the species composition and vigour, and it can be scored as either good, fair or poor. The assessment site is a semicircular area on the default side of the vehicle with a 50-metre radius, and if there is a track effect, either track erosion or water starvation, that assessment site is shifted further out to avoid that track effect. We're assessing pastoral management. We would still note any severe erosion as part of an assessment. The two officers will then walk across the site and reach a consensus agreement and assessment of the condition of the site. In the Kimberley grasslands, the officers would always get out of the vehicle and assess the site. In the southern rangelands, where vegetation can be much more sparse, it's not always necessary to get out of the vehicle to make that assessment. Reports are prepared using internal templates for rigour and internal review, and the lessees are always invited to provide feedback and comment on that draft report. The finalised report, including the lessee comment, is then provided to the Commissioner of Soil and Land Conservation. The Commissioner will then be guided by the Framework for Sustainable Pastoral Management, which Rob Submeyer spoke about yesterday, and make a determination as to how to respond to that report, and then communicate her findings to both the lessee and the Pastoral Lands Board. For more information, talk to one of our team or use a link.
Well done. Very well done. Does anybody have a question? If nobody puts hands up, I'm going to ask one quickly. So, Nathan, does the methodology of trying to identify the pastoral leases that have had everything stacked against them in terms of a poor season and the stocking rate elevated for whatever the herd is doing there, and doing an RCA on it at that time, run the risk of maybe not getting a holistic view of the country and how its stocking rate responds in good seasonal conditions?
Look, that's a great question. And the whole premise of the rangeland condition assessment is we're measuring that long-term trend and change, and we're trying to avoid just what might be seen as seasonal effects. So we're looking at the density of those desirable perennials. And whilst your food and offer might go from a very high level of utilisation to a low level of utilisation to a high, it's that density of perennials which we're assessing. That's something which doesn't tend to change from one season to the next, but it's a long-term change over a number of seasons.
Taken. Well, one more.
G'day, Nathan. Richard Marver. I'm just wondering, on the back of Kath's presentation and on the really cool state and transition models you guys have now developed and are hopefully continuing to develop for other pasture types, I'm a big believer in looking at land condition as a trend or a moving thing, where it's coming from, where it's going to. How is that going to work into the RCAs? For instance, you go to an area that was had some bare areas and is now being covered over by woody weeds or other things like that when you come out later. Is that going to be considered an improvement, a deterioration, or is it just going to remain as a poor? Is there some sort of, I guess, assessment of direction of movement of a land system based off the back of those state and transition models?
I think, in short, the learnings which we'll get from those state and transition models will certainly be incorporated into what we're doing. In the meantime, it's a great segue. Our Southern Rangelands Pasture Condition Guide is very much soon to be released, and the condition guides are the way which we assess condition. Outside of that, yeah, we're constantly looking to improve what we do.
Please join me in thanking Nathan. We'll keep rolling through them. Thanks. Could we please have Katie Hay from Queensland DAF to the stage? She's going to tell us about Mitchell grass response on flood-affected country in the Northern Downs of Queensland. Thanks, Katie.
Thank you. They've saved the best topics for last, I reckon. But right, in the interest of time, I'm going to put a rocket under this thing and just get into the important stuff. So, quick background. In 2019, the Northern Gulf and Northwest Queensland experienced monsoonal flooding that I'm sure a lot of you had something to do with or have at least heard of, off the back of 6 to 7 years of drought. So 13 million hectares were affected, estimated 500,000 head of cattle were lost. In the 12 months following the flood, producers in the Richmond Shire reported that mature Mitchell grass tussocks were slowly dying off, with new recruits not surviving. So over 4 years on, and producers are still seeing significantly affected pastures in the area where floodwaters sat. It was expected that there would, of course, be some effects, but that there would have been more recovery than there has been so far. So this photo is the same site. There has been no work done to it. This property is 26,000 acres of Ashy Downs, 20 kilometres south of Richmond. On the left is where floodwater sat, and on the right is where it didn't. The photo taken in May obviously looks a lot better to the eye, but that is Flinders grass and isolema, which isn't a bad annual to have in terms of grazing, but obviously the digestibility drops off pretty quickly, and I would suspect that that site would be bare bones again now. So this site in particular was the beginning of this mini project, and as all good work does, discussions around this happened at the local bore, and shared some photos with a producer, had a property visit, and pretty much just confirmed the producer's concerns. So from here we started working together, found a few other properties that had the same issue, and developed a 2-phase project plan for the Richmond Recovery Project. So the aim was to discover the lack of recovery, or the cause of the lack of recovery, if any, with a stop-go clause for a phase 2 to explore further options for trials depending on what we found. We worked with 2 properties that had 3 variables of country that was flooded and recovering poorly, country that was flooded and recovering intermediately, and then unflooded productive country. We completed some LCATs, put in pasture monitoring sites, did some botanical analysis to record composition and species yield ground cover for 12 sites all up. And we did soil samples at 0 to 10, 30 to 50, and 80 to 100 centimetres. And we also completed some Solvita testing, which is a biological CO2 burst test that measures soil respiration as an indicator of soil health. So what did we find? Straight away we could quantify that the non-flooded areas had 10 times the amount in areas of preferred pasture species compared to both the areas that were flooded. And we're talking figures of up to 5,500 kilos per hectare of dry matter, with all of it being sort of Curly Mitchell and Flinders grass. Our soil chemistry came back showing that flooded sites have highly alkaline soils ranging from 8.7 to 9.4, whereas they should be around that 8.5 mark. And our sodium percent of cations indicated elevated sodicity in the form of sodium bicarbonate in the surface, with percentages ranging from 7 to 11%. And we suspect that these factors aren't compatible with germination. And we saw no differences or nothing notable in our Solvita testing. So what's next? Strip trial. So next week we'll hit the ground running, fence off a 1 hectare area in our poor or intermediate flooded sites with the treatments up here, planning to get it cultivated, spread some gypsum over half of our area, have 2 replicates, and then broadcast via hand after the first storms. Thank you.
One question, if it's good on burning. No, thanks very much, Katie. Good on you.
Thank you.
And to bring it home, next we've got David Phelps from the Tropical North Queensland Drought Hub to talk to us about Mitchell grass response to moisture stress and defoliation. Thanks, David.
Thank you. Now, Don Burnside, I've been sitting up the front there, hearing you chatting away. Please heckle as much as you like. Feel free. Fun fact, where is that pointer thing? The trial I'm going to talk about is set up in my backyard. Because the plan is for this to run for at least 20 to 30 years, certainly as long as myself and my wheelie walker in the future can get out and measure Mitchell grass tussocks. The reason for looking at something over such a long period of time is that probably everyone here who's worked with Mitchell grass has seen examples where it's been defoliated, chewed right down, for instance, and recovered particularly well. Especially for us, we made observations during the previous drought, so the Millennium Drought, where paddocks that have been grazed heavily but intermittently actually responded to an inch or 2 of rainfall far better than adjacent paddocks that we would say had retained the amount of stubble, the tiller height that we would recommend. So we wanted to unlock this a bit further, understand just what's going on, so that we can make sensible suggestions towards management. So I've mentioned the defoliation. That's the key component of this actual experiment. Clipping Mitchell grass tussocks back to 0 centimetres, maybe about 1 centimetre, or 15 centimetres. Now, the key thing that we're really looking for, though, which all the pastoral industry is not, so apologies to all the graziers here, we're looking for a rip-roaring drought, because that's what's really going to, I guess, reveal to us whether it is the dead old tillers, for instance, during drought that suppress the regrowth based on rainfall, or if it's perhaps keeping those tillers fresh and dynamic, young and vigorous, if you like, a bit like the ARS calling for younger members. So to date, we haven't had to irrigate. This has been going for roughly 12 months. My wife, son and I battled grasshoppers, heat waves, etc., to try and establish these plants over the 21-22 summer. It was a good summer. We irrigated all plants, but the taps are now off, so we're waiting for the next drought. Half of the plants will be watered, so they won't be stressed. The others will face whatever stresses the drought actually throws at them. And then we'll keep recording tiller numbers, leaf numbers, photosynthetic area, inflorescence numbers, rhizo numbers, just about anything that you could think of that perhaps a 70-year-old Phelps on a walking frame could measure in 20-odd years' time. To date, with just a single clipping, basically we've reinforced what we already know. A moderate defoliation stimulates mitchell grass. Mitchell grass needs a burn or a graze, it really does. So tiller production per plant, for instance, has been stimulated through that single clipping to 15 centimetres height, but not to 0 centimetres. It's a no-brainer, really. You cut the tillers off, it takes more effort to grow them back. However, I guess what was interesting was that the photosynthetic area, as in the leafiness in terms of response at either height, was pretty similar and certainly better than any of the unclipped plants. So already seeing a bit of a response there in terms of the photosynthetic capacity and the ability for that mitchell grass to actually grow roots, store reserves at its crown. The implications, I've already mentioned that first one, which is supporting those previous studies. As I mentioned, we're yet to experience a good rip-roaring drought to see what really is going to happen. But overall, I think one of the, certainly my call to action, and it's not just for this experiment, but for everything we're doing in the rangelands, really requires long-term investment. We're looking at non-equilibrium systems. We have mitchell grass, which lives for 20 to 30 years, for instance. We have trees that live for centuries. We are studying all of these ecosystems in a grazing context that's facing very long-term changes and with more changes to come. So we really need that investment, whether that be private investment in our own backyard, public and private investment into large grazing trials and demonstrations, but we've got to have it because things are changing and we need to know what's coming around the corner. Thank you.
Thanks very much, David. Is there a question for David?
Thanks, David. Marg Friedel. An interesting observation from the 1960s, and I wasn't there at the time, but that...
Don might have been.
This is Central Australian mitchell grass plains. George Chippendale, the government botanist, was pilloried subsequent to the 60s drought for saying that the pastoralists had destroyed the mitchell grass because it had been eaten out completely, and he said, that's it, you've ruined the mitchell grass pastures, they're gone. And Des Nelson, who's a long-term resident and has told the story that as soon as the rains came back and the drought broke, within 6 weeks there was a substantial regrowth, but not regrowth, but germination. And so the mitchell grass plains recovered. And so I suppose it was an interesting thing to know that if the soil seed bank is still there, it's potentially going to recover. And perhaps you need to make sure that you've got seeds falling into your garden plots to see what happens after the drought.
Thanks, Marg. And there's so many observations along similar lines, and yet we see the Ashy country, for instance, impacted by the 2019 monsoon trough, where it has failed to recover, even though one would think there should have still been a seed bank. For this particular trial, it's a fully replicated split plot design for those bit sciencey amongst us, with 40 plants, and the trade-off actually was that half of our orchard has now been removed and replaced with mitchell grass. But I think the key thing around any observations with grazing is that it's all about the timing the frequency of defoliation. It's not as simple as just, grazing can be damaging. It's that grazing can also be stimulating, but we need to better understand those processes. Bob.
David, Bob Shepherd, yeah. I guess utilisational grazing by say a sheep or a beef animal is very different from using shears to clip down to get your utilisation rate. Can I suggest you put a couple of sheep in your backyard as
well? Bob, did I give the impression that I was using shears? Oh. I'm pretty dedicated. No, it is shears, and that is a point. There is research that demonstrates that animal, particularly ruminant saliva, for instance, can give at least small stimulation to growth. So there are some things that we're missing out by using clippers. But I think the important thing will be the longevity of this trial, and I hope to present in another, say, 5 to 10 years as to what we've really found after the next drought. Artie.
With some flooded Mitchell grass country, some not so flooded, and having been through the 80s droughts and the 09 very wet year, which we had an amazing response, and other ones like the 19 one where we had very poor response. We still saw one of the greatest germinations I've seen in 40 years from the 19 flood. But my take on what happened to any of our country that had a weight of water over it, push the organics, push the air out of the soil, push the organics out of the soil, and it took about 3 years for those solidic soils to regain any health to carry on. I've never seen the moisture run away from Mitchell grass seedlings so quickly as after that 19 flood. It was literally 6 weeks later that I could put a breaker bar a metre down into the ground. There was no organics to keep the soil in a profile. The reverse happened in this year where our soils had somewhat healed quite a lot from the 19 flood, and that moisture retention stayed on so well. And as a result, this year we've had an incredible recruitment and incredible Mitchell grass density. But comparing those different years between 09 and 19 were dramatic. Both big years, both a lot of moisture, but just a level of water that killed country, and the weight of that. And we seem to see that about every 10 years. And when we get a decent flood, they're just some of the other effects than just measuring the Mitchell grass tussock in different ways. But
I reckon the other half of my orchard's now gone, and that will be flood-induced.
Be great.
So in the interest of lunch, David will probably have to take the rest of his questions off stage. Please join me in thanking David. Just before we break, I've got a quick message to pass on from the committee that there's a publication committee meeting to take place after the conference is closed, so at 2:30 this afternoon in the Sammy room at the back. I've been asked to say that twice, so I'll say it again, that there's a publication committee meeting at 2:30 in the Sammy room out the back after the conference. Thanks very much. Lunchtime.